Behold the 1940s DoAll V-36 vertical bandsaw, a hulking beast of cast iron that still slices through steel like butter after decades of relentless use. Compare that to a modern welded steel bandsaw barely holding together after a few years, its frame twisting under tension and spitting out crooked cuts. How did we go from machines that laughed at abuse to ones that crumble under a deadline? Let's step back to the early 1940s, a time when the world was tearing itself apart. The United States had entered World War II, and the industrial machine roared to life with a ferocity that left no room for error. Factories across the nation were tasked with churning out everything from tank parts to aircraft components at a pace never seen before. Failure wasn't just a setback. It was a death sentence for soldiers on the front lines waiting for gear that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The desperate need for precision tools to shape raw metal into complex dies and molds birth machines like the DoAll V-36. This wasn't about convenience or profit, it was about survival. Every factory floor became a battlefield, and the stakes were as high as the smokestacks that loomed over them. If a machine couldn't keep up, if it couldn't cut true under pressure, entire production lines would grind to a halt, and the ripple effect would be felt all the way to the trenches. Now, let's talk about the raw, brute force engineering that made the V-36 a legend. At the heart of this machine was its secret weapon, a massive cast iron C-frame, a single, unyielding spine forged from seasoned iron. This wasn't just any frame, it was a monolith, designed to withstand the kind of forces that would snap lesser materials like twigs. Weighing in at over 1,000 pounds, this frame absorbed thousands of pounds per square inch of blade tension without so much as a quiver. That rigidity meant the sole blade tracked dead straight, no matter how hard you pushed a 10-inch slab of steel into it. There was no flex, no distortion, just pure, unrelenting precision. The iron's sheer mass dampened vibrations, turning the chaotic energy of cutting into a controlled, predictable force. You could feel the heat radiating off the blade as it bit into metal. Hear the deep hum of inertia as the machine powered through without hesitation. And then there was the built-in Flash Butt Welder, a feature so ingenious, it's almost criminal we've lost it. A machinist could drill a hole in a workpiece, snap the blade, thread it through, and weld it back together right there on the machine's side panel in minutes. This turned the V-36 into a self-contained fabrication unit capable of cutting internal shapes without missing a beat. It wasn't just a tool, it was a fortress of engineering might. But let's not romanticize this beast without acknowledging the toll it exacted on the men who tamed it. Operating a vertical bandsaw in the 1940s wasn't a desk job, it was a grueling test of endurance. Workers, often laboring in sweltering factory conditions, stood for hours guiding heavy steel blocks into the blade, their muscles straining against the weight and pressure. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cutting oil and metal dust, coating their lungs with every breath. A moment's lapse in focus could cost a finger, or worse, as the blade moved with merciless speed. Heat exhaustion was a constant companion, especially in summer months, when factory ventilation was little more than a cruel joke. And yet, these men pushed on, their hands calloused and their backs bent, knowing that every cut they made was a step toward winning a war. The physical scars were badges of honor, proof of their grit in an era when machines demanded as much from their operators as they gave in return. Fast forward to today, and the V-36 stands as a monument to endurance. Many of these machines, now pushing 80 years old, still run in small shops or hobbyist garages, cutting as true as they did on day one. Their cast iron frames bear the scars of decades' dings, scratches, and layers of grime, but they don't buckle. Contrast that with a modern welded steel bandsaw, a flimsy pretender built from bent sheet metal and square tubing slapped together for the sake of cutting shipping costs. Under the same blade tension that the V-36 shrugs off, these modern frames flex and twist like a cheap toy. The blade wanders, drifting off course because the structure lacks the backbone to enforce a straight path. You can mark a perfect line, but the cut will follow the path of least resistance, turning precision work into a frustrating game of chance. We stopped building machines like the V-36 because profit margins trumped longevity. Casting iron is expensive and heavy, a logistical headache in a world obsessed with lightweight, disposable solutions. So, we traded 1,000 pounds of reliable strength for a cheaper shipping label, and now we're left with tools that fail when we need them most. So, where does this Titan stand today? Many V-36s have been scrapped, their iron melted down for pennies, but a lucky few survive in museums, or the hands of collectors who understand their worth. Some even hum along in obscure workshops, defying time itself. As we marvel at their stubborn refusal to die, we're forced to ask, is this relentless march of progress worth the cost of forgetting how to build machines that truly last? Now, let's dive into the gritty reality of the men and women who stood shoulder to shoulder with the DoAll V-36 on those wartime factory floors. These weren't just operators. They were warriors in their own right, battling heat, noise, and unrelenting pressure in environments that could break a person just as easily as the machine broke through steel. Picture a factory in 1943, sprawling and cavernous, filled with the deafening roar of machinery running day and night. The air hangs heavy with the sharp tongue of hot metal and the bitter sting of industrial lubricants, a constant assault on the senses. Workers, often clad in sweat-soaked overalls, maneuvered massive steel blocks into position, their arms trembling under the strain of guiding raw material into a blade that showed no mercy. These weren't lightweight tasks. A single misstep could mean disaster, and the weight of responsibility was as heavy as the materials they handled. The physical toll was brutal and unyielding. Shifts stretched on for 12 hours or more, with barely a moment to sit or catch a breath. The heat from the machines radiated in waves, turning the factory floor into an oven during the long summer months. Sweat dripped into eyes, already strained from focusing on the narrow line where blade met metal, and the lack of proper ventilation meant every inhale was laced with fine particles of dust and grit. Hands grew rough and calloused, gripping controls or wrestling with heavy stock, while backs ached from the constant stooping and lifting. The risk of injury loomed like a dark shadow over every operation. A lapse in attention, a slight miscalculation, and the blade could claim a finger or a hand in an instant. Stories of severed limbs weren't uncommon, whispered between workers as grim reminders to stay sharp. And beyond the immediate dangers, the long term wear on their bodies was just as real: aching joints, ringing ears from the ceaseless din, and lungs burdened by years of breathing in the factory's toxic haze. Yet, these men and women pressed on, driven by a purpose larger than themselves. They knew that every piece of steel they shaped, every die or tool they crafted, was bound for the war effort. A single flawed cut could mean a faulty part, and a faulty part could mean a plane that didn't fly or a tank that didn't roll. Their labor was a direct line to the soldiers on the front, and the weight of that connection fueled their grit. Many were veterans of the Great Depression, already hardened by years of scarcity and struggle, and they brought that same stubborn resolve to the factory floor. They weren't just clocking in for a paycheck. They were fighting a war of production, where every drop of sweat and every ounce of pain was a contribution to victory. Breaks were scarce, and complaints were rarer still. To falter was to let down not just a foreman, but an entire nation counting on their output. The psychological strain matched the physical. The pressure to maintain speed without sacrificing precision was a tightrope walk. Foremen barked orders over the cacophony, demanding quotas be met while scrutinizing every piece for perfection. A worker might spend hours on a complex contour cut, muscles tense and mind razor-focused, knowing that a single deviation could scrap an entire block of steel and hours of work along with it. Fatigue gnawed at their edges, but there was no room for error, no allowance for exhaustion. Add to that the ever-present specter of injury, and the mental load became a crushing force of its own. Yet, they adapted, forging a camaraderie born of shared hardship. They swapped tricks for handling the machine's quirks, shared grim humor about close calls, and propped each other up when the weight of the day threatened to break them. It was a brotherhood and sisterhood of the factory floor, forged in the heat of necessity. This human cost wasn't just a footnote. It was the heartbeat of the industrial machine. The V-36 didn't run itself, it demanded sacrifice, and the workers paid that price in blood. sweat, and sheer willpower. They weren't cogs in a machine. They were its lifeblood, pouring everything they had into keeping the gears of war turning. And while the cast iron frame of the bandsaw stood unyielding, the bodies and spirits of those who operated it bore the scars of every cut. Their endurance mirrored the machine's own, a testament to a time when both man and tool were built to withstand the unimaginable. As we look back on their struggle, it's impossible not to feel a pang of respect for the sheer tenacity it took to stand at the helm of such a beast, day after grueling day, knowing that the fate of a world at war rested on their weary shoulders. Now, let's peel back the layers of time and witness how the DoAll V-36 faced the relentless march of decades, standing as a defiant relic of an era when durability wasn't just a feature, it was a mandate. Many of these machines, born in the fiery urgency of the 1940s, have endured over 80 years of punishing use. You can still find them in the corners of old workshops or tucked away in the garages of dedicated machinists, their cast iron frames scarred and weathered but still holding true. The dings and scratches etched into their surfaces tell stories of countless projects, of steel slabs carved into intricate shapes under the hands of workers long gone. Yet, when you fire one up, the blade still tracks with unerring precision, slicing through metal as if it rolled off the assembly line yesterday. That unyielding C-frame, forged from a single massive casting, absorbs tension and vibration with the same stoic indifference it did during wartime production runs. It's a brutal kind of beauty, a machine that refuses to bow to age or neglect, its sheer mass a silent rebuke to everything flimsy and fleeting. Compare that to the sad state of modern bandsaws, cobbled together from welded steel frames that prioritize cost over capability. These contemporary contraptions, often built from thin sheet metal and hollow tubing, are a gamble at best. Put them under the kind of blade tension required for serious cutting, and they flex and warp, bending like a reed in the wind. The result is a blade that drifts, wandering off the marked path because the frame lacks the guts to hold it steady. A straight line on paper becomes a meandering curve in steel, wasting material and time while the operator fights a losing battle against physics. I've seen these machines in action, or rather, in failure, where a simple job turns into an exercise in frustration, the cut veering off course as if it has a mind of its own. It's not just poor design, it's a betrayal of purpose. And the worst part, when these modern frames inevitably give out after a handful of years, they're often unrepairable, destined for the scrap heap, while their owners shell out for a replacement just as frail. Why did we abandon the kind of engineering that made the V-36 a titan? It boils down to the cold calculus of profit over permanence. Casting a 1,000-pound iron frame is a slow, expensive process, requiring skilled labor and hefty resources. It's heavy to ship, a logistical thorn in the side of a global supply chain obsessed with cutting corners. Modern manufacturers saw an opportunity to slash costs by switching to lightweight, welded assemblies that roll out of factories faster and cheaper. Never mind that they can't handle the stress of real work. They look shiny on the showroom floor and sell just fine until they fail. Then there's the specter of planned obsolescence, a deliberate choice to build tools that wear out, ensuring a steady stream of repeat customers. Add to that the so-called safety theater, where over-engineered guardrails and electronic shutoffs bloat the design with complexity, often at the expense of core strength. We've traded rugged simplicity for a mirage of progress, leaving us with machines that crumble under deadlines while their ancestors stand ready to outlast us all. This stark contrast isn't just about hardware. It's a mirror held up to our priorities. The V-36 was built for a world where failure could cost lives, where every tool had to be a fortress against collapse. Today, we've grown complacent, seduced by the allure of disposable tech and quick fixes. Take a modern tractor, for instance, bricked by a mandatory software update that locks the owner out until they pay for a dealer unlock code. It's a far cry from the V-36, which needed nothing more than a steady hand and a sharp blade to keep running. That old bandsaw didn't come with an app or a subscription fee. It came with a promise of reliability, a promise it kept through decades of abuse. Meanwhile, we're stuck wrestling with tools that seem designed to fail. Their fragility a calculated feature rather than a flaw. The irony is thick when you consider how these old machines were often dismissed as outdated, hauled off to make room for the latest and greatest. Yet, the latest often proves to be a downgrade, a hollow shell of what came before. The V-36 and its kin endured because they were overbuilt by design, with safety factors that modern engineers would scoff at as wasteful. But that supposes tueri. Why, a machine from the 1940s can outperform a 2020s counterpart without breaking a sweat. It's a lesson we've forgotten in our rush to optimize everything down to the last penny, sacrificing substance for savings. As we watch these modern failures pile up, one has to wonder if we've lost more than just good engineering. We've lost the will to build for the long haul, to craft tools that stand as legacies rather than landfill fodder. So, where do these iron giants, these DoAll V-36 bandsaws, rest now after their long and storied service? Many have met an inglorious end, dragged to the scrapyard, and melted down for mere fractions of their worth, their cast iron frames reduced to raw material for lesser things. Yet, some endure, preserved in the quiet halls of industrial museums or cherished by collectors who recognize the weight of history in every dent and scratch. A fortunate few still rumble to life in hidden workshops, operated by those who value raw durability over flashy gimmicks. These survivors stand as relics of a bygone ethos, humming with the same defiant energy they carried through the chaos of wartime production. They are not just machines. They are monuments to a time when the word built meant something unassailable, a promise etched in iron that no amount of rust can erase. As we stand before these enduring beasts, or mourn the ones lost to short-sighted greed, a bitter question lingers in the air. What have we truly gained in our blind sprint toward progress, when the cost is a world of tools that snap under pressure and gadgets that die by design? The V-36 reminds us of a harder, grittier era, where machines were forged to outlast their makers, not to line a corporate ledger. We've swapped that rugged permanence for a culture of throwaway tech, where a bricked device or a warped frame is just another Tuesday. Perhaps it's time to look back, to remember that true advancement isn't measured in quarterly profits or lightweight shipping crates, but in the stubborn, unyielding strength of what we leave behind for the next generation to stand upon.